today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about the silent marriage, the marriage where not a lot of substantive conversation is happening when it comes to the relationship. In a silent marriage, we pretend that everything's wonderful when our internal needs and expectations they're just not even being talked about, much less addressed. There's outward harmony. In fact, the purpose of the silent marriage is to avoid conflict altogether. Peace on the surface, loneliness underneath. Peace on the outside, sad on the inside. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship, and I am your host, Richheller, and today we are talking about what is the silent marriage. It kind of brings up for me this image of, I don't know how many of you have ever seen a silent movie, but when movies first came out, they had no sound. They're just only what we call subtitles now. And a silent marriage is kind of like a silent movie with not many subtitles. So that means you spend a lot of time trying to figure out what's going on because no one's really talking. Joanne says, everyone says we're the perfect couple, but why do I feel like I'm living with a stranger? First, Joanne, I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm glad that everyone sees you as the perfect couple. And I'm sorry that you feel like you're living with a stranger. And when we're living with a stranger, it's very often because there's just not a lot of communication happening. Last episode, we talked about roommates with rings. At least when you're roommates with rings, there's some kind of communication. But when you're living with a stranger, when you're in a silent marriage, that's almost like, how do you I didn't even know you lived here. Where did you come from? And it's because the reason why it's like that, instead of saying, hey, who are you? You're saying, who are you? It's because in your social world, when you're in a silent marriage, when you're together socially, you almost have a script that you do in a silent marriage. And it's a script of, it's not I'm fine, it's we're fine. Talk to the last episode about fine. Forget internal needs and expectations. Well, socially, in a silent marriage, we pretend that everything's wonderful when our internal needs and expectations they're just not even being talked about, much less addressed. There's outward harmony to the world, to family, to other parents, at work, but inward, we're avoiding each other almost completely. We perform togetherness for others, but we dodge almost all talks at home. We're so systemized, and our division of labor is so complete that there's little or no conversation. Now, we've also talked in previous episodes about the golden marriage myth. There's a difference between this and the golden marriage myth. The golden marriage myth is about, look at how financially successful we are. This is more about speaking like you're successful without focusing so much on the house or the car. It's more like mimicking life success is probably the best way to put it. But it's an emotional performance. So the difference is, in the golden marriage, you're all about materialism. In the silent marriage, you're pretending that you have an amazing marriage. You may not have the physical trappings. You might have the physical trappings. It's emotional performance versus emotional honesty. Tom says, we don't fight much, but we also don't really talk about anything that matters. Is that normal? Another great question from Tom. Sadly, this is fairly normal. It's fairly normal that in public, we smile. In public, we make jokes. In public, we give partnership vibes. We do a great partnership act together. In private, there's a lot of distance. There's a lot of silence. There's parallel lives. And it may not even be hostile. It might be kind of cold, right? A hostile distance wouldn't be silent. Hostility vibrates harmonically. Silence is more like avoidance of one another. There's just no emotional presence. It's kind of dead. In fact, the purpose of the silent marriage is to avoid conflict altogether. Peace on the surface, loneliness underneath. Peace on the outside, sad on the inside. There's a stat that states that 1 in 4 married couples describe themselves as emotionally distant but stable. That's from the National Survey of Families and Households in 2020. Emotionally distant but stable. The silent marriage is very much about this. We are going to keep the peace. It's a balance of power. We're going to keep the peace. It's détente. We're going to keep the peace and present everything's fine. It's good diplomacy is what it is. It's bad marriage. Lillian asks, if we're not fighting, isn't that a good thing? And yeah, it's a good thing. It's better than fighting all the time. Studies on child well-being show that the highest level of well-being are parents who are in agreement, who are on the same page, who have emotional fluency with one another. The next level is parents who are living separately, who are pretty much on the same page when it comes to values and how to raise children. The third level is people who are divorced and not on the same page. And the lowest level of well-being is parents who are living together and not on the same page. And I would argue that on that lowest level, not fighting is probably the top of that lowest level. It might be a step towards being divorced, however, because even though it's better to keep the peace by not rocking the boat, you still are not working out what differences need to be addressed, right? The truth is that change happens in the context of differences, expressing differences. And when people have agreed to live separate but equal lives without confronting their differences, when people who signed up for a partnership pretend that they have a partnership in public and in private just pretty much lead very separate lives because they're afraid of rocking the boat, they don't grow. Things don't get better. And something that isn't getting better is generally getting worse. They may get the cultural reward, admiration for being the couple that presents well, but they know the truth, which is they're not growing in their partnership. This can happen because of learned scripts that conflict equals danger, that silence equals love. These are things we might have learned from our parents, or maybe we grew up with parents who fought all the time, and rather than have that, we'd rather have this. And those are all valid experiences, but we don't have to let the past define us. We can take the past and the lessons from the past and grow into something more. And when we stop growing, when we stop talking, when we stop airing out our differences, we stop growing individually and in our relationship. We might engage in this because the brain chemistry of a brain that evolves in a genetically female body often feels responsible for harmony, or the brain chemistry of a brain that develops in a genetically male body often feels that avoiding conflict escalation is what's best for everyone involved. And those are all great instincts, but they're misapplied. True harmony comes in expression and resolution of difference, creative resolution of difference. True serenity as a goal only occurs by moving through the things that you've been avoiding. The Gottman Institute did a study of stonewalling, which primarily occurs in men, and 85% of stonewalling, it turns out, in marriages is done by men, and they do it to avoid conflict escalation, not just because they're silent SOBs. Another listener says, we keep things calm, but I feel invisible. Is that just the price of peace? As things now are, keeping things calm, the way that you're doing it, by avoiding personal expression, is the price of peace, but it does not have to be. You can have personal expression. You can express your needs. You can express your expectations in a way that they can be received by the other person, and so can they. And when you both received one another's needs and expectations, when you actually receive them and get them without trying to push them away or fight them, you can now find common ground to fulfill needs and expectations. Maybe not all of them, maybe just some of them. But if you just start with a few, you can start to work your way up to the more complex ones, and a new piece in which you are heard and understood will emerge. I want you to get this equation. Suppressed difference equals suppressed intimacy. SD equals SI. Suppressed difference equals suppressed intimacy. Intimacy is based in vulnerability. Vulnerability is based in feeling safe enough to share difference. The long-term cost of suppressing difference and intimacy is the marriage may look good on the outside, but it is dying on the inside. Avoidance of conflict is one of the top predictors of divorce within 5 years. If you have this going on now, the chances are you're moving towards divorce. I want you to really get that. Kate asks, how do we start talking about the hard stuff without it turning into a blow up? And this is a really important question. You may not have, it's based in this. Number one, how easily triggered are you both? I was working with a couple recently where we're working in some baseline practices using I statements, committed listening, agreeing not to blow up, that if we feel ourselves blowing up, we're going to step in our corners. And the next step to that would be to start, and once we do that, now that we have the understanding and the agreement and we have vehicles for expression and hearing one another, would be to talk about festering resentment and start getting some healing in those areas. And they were not willing to move forward because that felt too dangerous for them. This is working with a professional. I expect that they'll be back in 2 or 3 weeks, or they'll seek someone else to help them. It might be that I just wasn't a good fit, which happens. But the fact is that they felt so unsafe with their own feelings, with airing them out. They were afraid everything was going to blow up. And a part of this needs to be a decision that where you are is worse than if you blew up. You got to take the risk of blowing up to get to that place, sometimes with the help of a trusted professional. The goal is not to have constant conflict. It's dialogue that builds intimacy. Dialogue that builds intimacy might be airing out your differences without reacting to them or even trying to resolve them. Right? What this couple avoided was airing out. One of the members felt so easily triggered, and in deference to that individual, they have things going on in their lives that might cause them to be easily triggered. Maybe they need to manage those other things first before they focus on the marriage. Sometimes that's the case. We need to be able to air our differences and just recognize them without making a judgment about whether we can tolerate the other person's differences, without making a judgment about whether they're right or they're wrong, without making a judgment about whether this is going to work. We just need to be able to air them out and just let that sit with us until we get to a place where we can now talk about them with acceptance of the concerns that drive those differences. And that often takes professional guidance. If a good marriage isn't about never fighting, what is it about? Good marriages equals authenticity, airing out needs and expectations. It's about honest sharing of self, not so much about performance. If we have the honest acceptance of one another, then we're going to perform better. True intimacy is knowing each other fully. The fact is that couples who argue constructively resolve differences easily and report greater long-term satisfaction than those who avoid conflict altogether. Remember, avoidance of conflict is a top predictor of divorce. So embracing difference and constructively resolving it is an indicator of marital success. If you want to talk to me about your situation, you can get a free consult through my website, richinrelationship.com. You need to join the free Bridge relationship group. There's a bunch of educational pieces in that group that you can grab, and there's a link to schedule a call with me. Feel free to do that. richinrelationship.com. In the meantime, thank you for being a listener. Have an amazing day and a fantastic tomorrow.